We won't.
She's not going into any sunset soon, Ellis.
It's 6 o'clock. Rebecca's here, and I'm pretty sure we're going to have some additional people joining us. But as you know, she's our assembly member, and also here is Sean Kumagai, who is of course a club member and a member of the Dublin City Council, and Rebecca's regional director. Is that correct?
District director. He runs the whole district.
Right.
With a very capable team.
Yes, a very capable team, and I've been speaking to them regularly. And I think just about everybody here knows who Rebecca is, although we have some newbies. They seem to be on the bottom of my screen anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So to tell you the story, the Rebecca narrative goes something like this. At the beginning of World War II, her grandmother was in Europe and needed somebody sponsoring them to come to the United States. Excuse me, Bob, can you send Moni Knopp a link? Because he just tweaked me. Anyway, Rebecca's grandmother sent a letter to somebody in New York asking them to sponsor her family coming to the United States. And this person said yes, and as a consequence of that, family came over. Her father was born here, and we have Rebecca with us. March of 2017, there was the Muslim ban, you'll all remember. The ACLU lawyers headed by Rebecca went to San Francisco Airport to meet the Muslims who were on the planes, and they didn't know what was going on, and they were going to hit the ground in the United States and deal with our legal system. So the ACLU went down there, and the story I've heard is that they, at one point, the Muslims were praying at San Francisco Airport, and TSA was coming down the hall, and Rebecca got up on a bench and said, wait a second, this is the United States of America. We have freedom of religion here. Let me finish. And she held off the TSA. Good story, it got in the paper. She told her grandmother about it. And what her grandmother said was, not enough. We have this assembly member with us today, and that is what makes Rebecca, Rebecca.
Yep.
Rebecca Bauer-Kahan.
I love Ellis's version of my story. I should have you tell it more often. My grandmother would love the version of the story.
I didn't speak to your grandmother.
Well, my grandmother was
Poetic license.
Yes. Well, first of all, since we're here tonight, can we all just take one moment and celebrate today and our wonderful, amazing senator who is now the vice presidential nominee? I brought my
You got an action figure. I want one of those.
Mine's upstairs.
Action figures. Look, I've got my Hillary and my Kamala action figures. So this time we're going to be victorious. So what a day. I was sitting in the appropriations hearing when the news came down, and all of us were like, what's happening? So it's super exciting that one of our own is going to be our next vice president, and what an amazing woman to take that job. So now we just need to go win that election, don't we? But first I want to thank you, Ellis, for inviting me and being with all of you guys. You know, most of you have been with me since the very, very beginning, including Ellis and Sharon, who New Year's resolution in 2018 was to see me get elected. So hopefully your New Year's resolution this year was to see Biden get elected. We need to be 2 for 2. But it's fun to be with you guys, and even if only virtually. I know it's so much better when we're in the Union Hall together, but at least we can be together this way and catch up, and our commutes are a little shorter, so there's that. But yeah, so I just wanted to come. I'm happy to give an update, and I know that there's some questions that have come in, which I think Ellis is going to ask her, and any other questions you guys have. Obviously, the thing that's top of mind for me and my office, and I think all of us, is COVID. It's the thing that we work on the most. we've been really focused on primarily keeping our community safe. That's the #1 goal at all times. And then also thinking about how do we get to the other side of this in a way that allows California and our local communities to recover and to allow people to go back to work with record unemployment, to have them return to their jobs and be able to keep their homes and get through this pandemic well and in good shape. So mostly, and I get a lot of questions about what I think about when we should open and when schools should open. And I'll tell you the truth, which is I think that I'm not a public health expert. And one of the things that I think is most important about this pandemic is that we rely on the incredible people who are doctors and public health experts who study the science and know best when it is right to open and when it is right to send our children to school. I obviously am very invested, as most of you know, in the school conversation because we're starting distance learning right here in my house on Thursday. 3 different classrooms set up and we're ready to go, which is going to be hilarious because we had to do a back to school video. 2 of them, one for my 3rd grader, one for my 1st grader. It took us a day and a half to do my 1st grade back to school video. So we're not off to a great start with distance learning, but hopefully it gets better once the teacher gets into the picture on Thursday. So it's an adventure for all of us. But at the end of the day, like most mothers, I want my kids to be healthy and I want them to be safe. And so I know it's the right choice for now that they learn from home. And, one of the things that we have done at the state level was we passed a budget trailer bill related to funding of the schools that requires them to have the same number of instructional minutes in distance learning as they had prior to distance learning. There should not be less or less quality instruction because they are not physically in the same place as their instructor. And we believe that's possible. And so we made that a mandate. Schools will not get their funding unless they meet those instructional minutes. And right? And I have to say, there's a mother who watched my kids finish school in 40 minutes every day in the spring and know they weren't learning as much in that setting. It was okay because it was short term, but not knowing how long this will last, that's a really critical piece. And I have to give credit to our amazing school boards. And I know we have one of our school board members here. Hi, Valerie. And who have worked incredibly hard. I mean, they overnight had to turn to distance learning in the spring. And I am so optimistic about where we are now, months later, and where my kids will be and all of our kids come next week when they all begin to start school. Although some started school already, Monday and Tuesday. But, our school districts have worked really hard to prepare our educators, to give them the tools they need. Obviously, the tools both our educators need and our students need, making sure we're meeting the needs of our students that don't have Wi-Fi, that don't have devices, and don't have meals, making sure we're meeting them exactly where they are, which is really critical right now. So kudos to our educators and our school boards who I think have prepped us to hopefully be in a better place. One of the questions we get a lot on school opening is the waiver process. Governor Newsom announced this magical waiver process that will allow schools to open, and everyone wanted to know what that was about. So our counties have come down and said that they will not be offering any waivers until we are declining in numbers for 14 days, which I think is the right decision. Given the number of community spread, they've said we're not even talking about it right now. And then once we get to that point where our numbers are actually going in the right direction and it seems to be safe, there'll be a lot of requirements the schools will have to meet to get that waiver, telling how the kids are going to distance, masking, social distancing, cohorting, keeping them in small groups so that if there is an exposure that it's limited in scope. Testing and contact tracing will have to be a part of the conversation. We are not in a good place right now on testing. We're getting to a better place on contact tracing, but we're still not there yet. And that has to be part of how we stem the tide of this virus and get it under control. And it's so critical. And we've had some incredible partners. I mean, Stanford Valley Care, kudos to them. It is really our private partners who set up the testing site in the Tri-Valley at the fairgrounds and have allowed us to expand testing as much as we have, but we have so much more to go, especially on turnaround time. As many of you may know, we are getting tests, they're saying 7 days, but the people I talked to are saying 12 days. And it's useless at 12 days, right? I mean, that's not a test that's meaningful because 14 days is our period of isolation. So if you're asymptomatic, by the time you get your test 12 days later, you're almost out of the time we would ask you to isolate. So we have to get quicker turnaround. We need to be getting to 48, 72 hours before we can really know that we can put people in congregate settings like schools and be safe. So masking, I'm going to talk about masking because it's the most important thing I hear, and I don't miss an opportunity to really get people to understand the value of wearing that simple mask. I had an amazing call with Kaiser who does an incredible job of data collection and really understanding what the data is telling them. And one of the things they told me was that if you are in close contact with someone who has COVID, close contact meaning more than 15 minutes, which isn't very long, you have a good conversation, it can easily last more than 15 minutes, and you are less than 6 feet apart and you are not wearing a mask, you have a 56% chance of contracting COVID. Okay, so you're gonna get, the likelihood is you will get COVID. So how do you change that dynamic? Masking is one of the most important things. So putting that mask on changes that number significantly. It reduces your likelihood if both of you are wearing masks and keep your 6 feet distance, then you're no longer in close contact and you don't have that 56% chance. So wear your masks, and that means even if you're going for a neighborhood walk with a friend, right? Because maybe you come in closer than 6 feet, you don't realize it, or you're sitting, I know a lot of people are having, you know, outdoor get-togethers with their friends where they're trying to keep their distance. Even then, I beg you to wear your mask because it's really a simple way to get this virus to stop spreading as rapidly as it is. So that's one of the critical things we're really working on, making sure people understand. If it gets into your family, into your home, you have a 76% chance of getting it. So, I mean, we really, once it's into your bubble, we're in trouble. So we got to keep it out of your bubble. And so that's a little bit about what's going on and what we're trying to do. Often I'm asked about whether I think we should reopen or shut down more. And again, I think we need to rely on the data and our scientists. And the data so far is telling us that actually social gatherings are where most of the spread is happening, just so you know. So, you know, it's not when you're in a store because everybody is actually abiding by the circles on the ground. They're keeping their distance. They're all wearing masks. And so they're following those rules to keep you from a close contact. When we're in social gatherings, people are being more lax, and that's where we're seeing a lot of the spread happening. And we want those kids back in school, so let's get that spread down. So that's a little bit about COVID. I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has specific questions, but we are here to support. It is something we obviously take a lot of calls on, and how we can help the community get through this time. The state budget. So we passed a budget. We had to come back after the deadline to get it right, but we were able to pass a budget, and one that I have to say, given the circumstances, I'm incredibly proud of. You know, we had to cut $56 billion. It's not easy. Wow. But the May revise that came out was hurting our most vulnerable Californians. It cut schools by 10%. As someone who represents schools with the lowest funding in the state, I can tell you they don't have 10% to cut. And, you know, our senior programming, our programs that kept people in their homes, the day programs were all being cut entirely. Those are programs not only that allow people to stay in their homes and age in place with dignity, they're also safer right now. 75% of the deaths we're seeing are in congregate care facilities. So it was a poor choice to say, oh, we're going to take those day programs away and force people into congregate facilities. And so we were able to save all of those programs. Healthcare cuts that made no sense. So Planned Parenthood, obviously a huge passion of mine. On the Planned Parenthood money, we get a 9-to-1 federal match. So those dollars are investments that we get such a return on our investment because of the federal match, and we were going to let all of that go. And we saved those dollars as well as important cuts to Medi-Cal and to other really critical services, especially in a pandemic. So I think that the budget we got to is as good as we could have gotten. Again, there were cuts that are going to hurt, and there will be in the years to come. You know, the economic times we're in aren't great, but I think that what we stood behind and what I'm really proud of is that we, like I said, we protected California's most vulnerable populations, and the kids were saved. Early childhood education, our childcare is so critical to getting our workforce back to work. And so we made sure that was a priority as well. So that's a little bit about the budget and what we're working on the COVID side. I'll add that one of the things that the district office is working on almost around the clock is unemployment. We get calls all day, every day from people who are struggling to get their unemployment checks. And Sean has been leading that effort in an incredible way to get our constituents the support they need to get that money, to keep them in their homes and to keep food on the table. And it is, the situation at EDD is, embarrassing is the wrong word. It's upsetting, and it needs to be fixed. And it is something that we as a legislature are really focused on. How can we have a government agency, and to their credit, we had historically low unemployment and we went to historically high unemployment overnight. which is unprecedented. But that being said, having a website where you can't change your password, I don't know there are any other websites out there for which that is true. And so we as California need to do better for Californians. And when someone can't get their unemployment check because they can't change their password, we're failing them. And so it's really a focus of the legislature to make sure that we do better and that we fix it as fast as we can. And we have some of the best tech talent in the world right here in our backyard, and we need to utilize it to get better solutions for Californians. So a little bit about the legislation that I am carrying. I started with a fairly robust legislative package. Some of it we decided not to carry this year, given just we took a pretty long recess to try to stem the spread of COVID. And so we didn't have as much time to hear bills. So we voluntarily tabled some of my legislation until next year. Some of it I fought hard to keep and I didn't get to keep. And I'll talk about one of those bills. And then there was a couple bills we held on to and that we've continued to carry because we thought they were really important even during these challenging times. So one of those bills is AB 2559, which will be heard in Senate banking this week. It's actually on the consent calendar, so we expect it to be passed. And it's a bill that's really important. There are really wonderful protections for people who go and take a loan from a bank. And we make sure that you're protected in that loan and that if something happens, you can get restitution for whatever damages result from a bad loan. If you were to use one of the new lenders out there, Quicken, for example, provides loans but is not a bank, a non-bank lender, more and more popping up in the tech space, you are not covered by those same regulations, despite the fact that loan looks exactly the same to you as the consumer. So all this bill does is it extends those loan protections to these non-bank lenders. And it evens the playing field. And we decided this was a really critical piece of legislation right now because we know that this is when consumers are going to get taken advantage of, especially in the lending space, because people are going to be so desperate for money to stay in their home or to pay a medical bill or whatever the case may be. And so that bill continues to move, and it's something that hopefully will protect Californians during what is going to be a pretty challenging economic recovery. The second one is AB 2483, which is a bill that was my idea. We kept moving it because we thought it was important during COVID, but we weren't super optimistic about it. But it's now sitting in Senate Appropriations, and I'm optimistic that it's going to get out and that it'll pass. But it's a great bill focused on our dollars and where are they going. And the reason we thought this continued to be important was given the fact that we're cutting $54 billion from the budget. That's hard, and we need the best information to make those tough decisions. So what this bill does is, after realignment, we keep most of our low-level offenders in our county jails. They no longer go to state facilities. So a lot of people are being incarcerated in the counties, and the state is sending money to the counties to provide those individuals with programming. And billions of dollars is going from the state to the counties. We don't know how that money is being spent, and we don't know if anything they're doing is working to reduce recidivism and increase outcomes for our incarcerated population. So this bill just requires our sheriffs to report on how those dollars are being spent, what programs they're funding. I'm interested to make sure that they're spending them all on recidivism programs as they're supposed to, but also then they have to track in those programs, are people recidivating? Are they committing crimes? Are they working? Are we improving outcomes? And then we'll be able to replicate the programs that are working and not fund the ones that are not working. And so it's a really great, simple bill that builds on some data we already get from the local counties, but I think will be really important as we continue to have to cut costs in the years to come. And then the last bill, which we actually just stopped moving because we got what we were trying to get out of it before we even passed the bill, so that was a huge victory for California, was a bill focused on closing the digital divide. So we know that right now students, if they don't have access to a device, be it a laptop or a tablet and Wi-Fi, they can't attend school in most districts in California. And so we needed to make sure that every student had access to those devices so they could get the education they're entitled to. And so it was started out as a tax credit for schools. Our wonderful Amy Miller and Megan, Roust came and testified before the hearing about how much Dublin was spending on these devices to get their students through the pandemic. And then the tax credit died because appropriations didn't want it. So then we were able to get $25 million in the budget for this. So it was going to be a bill to move $25 million. And we were actually able to get that $25 million into the hands of schools this week. And so the bill has not moved, but we were succeeded in getting $25 million out there for kids to get those devices, which is really critical. And it's actually more exciting that it happened before the start of school. So schools just got the application a couple days ago, and they'll be able to seek that money. And it was great because it was money that was sitting in the PUC that was meant for this, that we just moved faster for this purpose. So that's a couple of the legislative things that we're working on that are really focused on the problems that California is seeing during this pandemic. So the one bill that I fought tooth and nail to keep was a wildfire bill, because wildfires aren't going anywhere. We may be in the middle of a global pandemic, but wildfires may happen, and we need to be prepared. And so that was one of the legislature's commitments, was that we would continue to work on wildfire legislation. As many of you, I believe that utility-caused wildfires are a huge problem and something that we need to be super on top of, and ensuring that PG&E especially is responsible and not acting the way they've acted for decades. And so I was moving a bill that I loved that would have given, and actually DA O'Malley was my co-sponsor, that would have given our local DAs authority over all health and safety regulations of utilities. So right now, the only way to enforce those regulations is through the PUC. The PUC has clearly failed us. So I believe that we need our local district attorneys to get on board in enforcing those regulations and ensuring that those lines are being well kept, that our trees are being trimmed. The only person doing that right now is the judge who oversees the San Bruno settlement. I mean, he is out there pushing PG&E so hard. Thank you, Judge Alsup. But when that consent decree ends, who is going to do that? Because I don't believe that the PUC will or has. And so we really want to get the DAs in that. The bill did not get heard in Assembly Utilities. Apparently they made some agreement that they wouldn't hear any bills. But we will continue to fight for that, because I think it's a change that will really make a difference and keep us safer and make sure that our utilities are being responsible. And if not, our DAs can take some action to enforce those regulations. So, but we continue to work with all of our local fire departments to get them the resources they need to do wildfire mitigation, to get us safe, doing education in the community, be prepared. And then we are going to face public safety power shutoffs. We've been assured they will be 30% less impactful than last year, but I can tell you that in my district, 30% less impactful is still very impactful. We saw a lot of public safety power shutoffs. We saw hospitals get shut off. Stanford Valley Care was shut off during a power shutoff, despite the fact they were told they weren't going to be. And so how do we make sure that we are doing right by our community, especially right now during power shutoffs? So we've been really focused on what is our critical infrastructure. That question, I believe, has expanded. So hospitals have always been critical infrastructure that we're supposed to keep up during a power shutoff. But you know what is, I think, critical right now? Are testing sites, right? If we go 6 days, which is how long part of my district was out last year, without testing, we don't know what's happening in the community. A week is a lifetime during this virus. So making sure that our testing sites stay up, our labs, Kaiser's running all of its tests through a lab in Berkeley, I believe. So keeping that lab up so that we don't, Kaiser is testing 40% of my constituents. If they can't run their tests, we're in trouble. Sorry?
No.
Oh, you're talking to me.
Excuse me. Should be muted.
No worries. And then how do we continue to move to a place where PG&E can both provide energy and be safe? They should be able to do those two things. It's not that hard, but they can't do it yet. So we're working on keeping them accountable and making sure we get there. One of the huge steps the legislature took, which I'm sure you read about, was the creation of Golden State Energy. So if we get to a point where we no longer feel PG&E can handle the operation of our utility, we now have a plan that will be a state, it's not a state-run utility, but an alternate utility that is a nonprofit public benefit company that could take over. So they know that is out there, and that's really important, I think, in holding them accountable for our safety and for everything that they are responsible for doing. So obviously, I talked about a lot of the hot topics that we're all thinking about right now, and I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Black Lives Matter. It's an issue that isn't new. You know, we worked on police use of force last year and passed the strongest police use of force bill in the nation before the death of George Floyd. The death of these individuals, of these Black and brown individuals at the hands of law enforcement, is not a new thing, but it's got renewed attention in a really powerful and wonderful way. We're having hard conversations about law enforcement and what is and is not appropriate and what their role in the community is, that I think is really healthy and great. And I think the community involvement that I have seen in my own district has been amazing. Every single city I represent has had Black Lives Matters movement that continue today. The high school students in Lafayette continue to have something this week focused on who we're allowing into some of our high schools. So it's a wonderful conversation that is long overdue, if you ask me. But and I want to, before I say what we are doing at the state level, I want to really hit home the point that people often look at us and look at Congress for solutions, and that's important. We need to provide solutions, but we also need to really be keeping our local council members and our supervisors accountable, because a lot of the budgets that go into our police come from the local level. They're not coming from your state and your Congress people. And so it's important that we have these conversations at every level of government, because I think that the question of what should police funding look like is an important one. I know that before all of this, we had I don't know how much you know about the Miles Hall case in Walnut Creek, a devastating death of a 20-something Black man who suffered from schizophrenia. And he was in a mental health crisis when he was shot and killed by the police. And in the wake of that, which was over a year ago, the conversations I had with law enforcement was about what is appropriate in the mental health space? Who should be responding? Where should the resources be going? And even the police will tell you, we're not trained to respond to these intense mental health crises. And so how do we shift funding and say, that's not your responsibility, let's put that on the people who are trained to do it, right? And that's the conversation that I think is really important and needs to be having around our police budgets, which really happen at the local level. But we are obviously doing work at the state level to make sure that we make movement as well. Like I said, 392, which was our use of force bill, went into effect in January. We put alongside it was a bill out of the Senate that did training on use of force, because we believe not only do we need to change the standard, we also needed to retrain all of our police on how to de-escalate, how to use force properly. And so all of that is happening now. We also did something which was really interesting, which was the public safety committees, which I sit on, didn't move any additional police training bills. That's it. We said we're going to making one change to police training this year, and it's going to be use of force. That way you can focus. You can focus all your energy on getting better in that area. And I think that was also a really important thing we don't talk about, but what we didn't do, I think, is really important, which was to say to the police, this is your focus. Change the way you do this, retrain your folks, and get it right. And the people whose bills were killed in police training weren't very happy about it, but I think it was an important move. We also did a package of legislation by Assemblymember Kamlager, who's an incredible assembly member out of Los Angeles, on implicit bias in sort of many areas, but the courts, law enforcement, and in schools, making sure all of those folks are getting implicit bias training so they understand their own bias and how it plays into their own actions. We are looking at studies, right? Schools, how do we educate kids to understand their own bias and the diversity and incredible value of diversity in California? And so we passed an ethnic studies bill that makes it a requirement at Cal State for them to be educated. There's also a bill moving that would make it a high school requirement, ethnic studies. So again, really looking at educating our youth to understand the value of all of this. We just passed out of public safety, Senator Skinner, an extension of her open records bill related to law enforcement. So she had done a bill that led to a whole load of police records, police misconduct records being released. And this would be an expansion of what would be released to just say, you know what, if you're committing wrongdoing in this field, and really it should be in any field, the public has a right to know. And so that bill moved out of public safety and is sitting in appropriations right now. But also looking at, you know, one of my favorite, I'm co-authoring 2 bills in this space that I really love. One is one that DA Becton and I had a wonderful conversation about, because she had actually, Miles Hall, she believes she's not the best person to do that investigation. She doesn't believe she's right. And she went to the Attorney General and asked the Attorney General to take that investigation over. And he said no. And so this bill would require the Attorney General to do those investigations in police use deadly force cases. And I think that's really important, that we have an outside source to do those investigations where we need independent investigation, because the families deserve that. And I know that as someone who's gotten to know Miles Hall's mother, that she deserves that. And so do a lot of the families, or all the families in the community who've lost life at the hands of law enforcement. And then another bill is banning the chokehold statewide. So that's Assemblymember Gibson's bill, and it's really critical. Most departments have done it. Law enforcement actually isn't opposing the bill because most of our law enforcement departments have banned it, but this would make it statewide so that it could no longer be used and we wouldn't see life lost in the way George Floyd lost his life. So that's a little bit about what we're doing in the space, but I think it's a really critical conversation. And I thank you for all being a part of it. I know you are. I know you're out there advocating for change, but it is, like I said, long overdue. And I think that we can do better, and that there's no question about that. And we should not be seeing men like George Floyd murdered. And it was, I mean, for anyone who watched that video, it is just appalling that we would have that happen in our country, and we need to change the dynamic. And we need to do it now. So that's just a little bit about what we're working on, but we're here. And, you know, I talked about what the office is working on. They've started a virtual office hour program. We're really trying to, we all work, well, I'm in the Capitol, but the rest of the staff is working remotely, but they're working full-time plus to serve the community and the constituents that need us right now. So if you need us, or if anyone that you're in contact with needs us when it comes to EDD. We've also been helping people with the DMV. There's been some extensions, but people have questions about, I don't feel safe going to the DMV, but I need X, Y, or Z. We can support you with that as well. So feel free to call. If we're not the right person to help you, we can always redirect you to Congressman Swallow's office or where the right place to go is. But we are here to answer your questions and help in any way we can. We know this is just the most challenging time that I've ever experienced in my lifetime. So we want to support the community as much as possible. There's my update, Ellis.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bob, if you can enable my share screen, is it enabled?
Yes, you should be able to do it.
Thank you.
Okay, and let me
What's
see.
Oh,
Yeah. Just a second. No, that's not the right one.
Hi there.
Excuse me.
John Rowe has a question.
Okay, here's the screen, and John Rowe has the first question, and it has to do with home care workers, and it's on the screen so you can see what John has written.
We can't
And,
see your screen yet.
we've got that spinning beach
Unmute
ball.
yourself, John, and
Yeah.
you can explain this.
We can't actually see your screen yet, Ellis.
Oh, you can't see
It
my.
started screen sharing, but it hasn't gotten there
John,
yet.
do you want to ask the question?
Just ask the question,
Hey,
John.
John, go ahead and ask the question while I fiddle with this.
Good afternoon, my
Sure.
dear Assembly member. It's always a pleasure to see you.
So good to see
that's
John.
sweet.
On behalf of Service Employees International Union Local 2015, of which I am a proud member of the executive board, I wish to, and I know we wish to, thank you for protecting us against the cuts to our budget for hours to seniors and disabled, and protecting the seniors and disabled in our state during this crisis.
Keep asking the question.
So thank you.
You
What I
know,
bring your attention to is the entire in-home supportive services, agencies, and public authorities in the 58 different counties in our state. This system could only have been designed by Frank Kafka. Even he would have been on his worst nightmare.
Ellis was
Max
in the-
Weber would have never done this.
I don't know if she knows who Frank Kafka is.
I know who Frank Kafka is.
Of
Thank
course
you.
he knows who Frank Kafka is. He's educated. But I will tell you, this is the most insane organizational system I've ever seen. And I have a master's in public administration. I'm trained in this stuff. We have 58 different systems in 58 different counties with 58 different board of supervisors with no coordination, no support, no PPE, no communications, unequal treatment, inequality of wages to where workers have gone 10 years without a wage increase. Then we have no benefits, we have no pensions, and this is going to explode. I personally saved the state of California $70,000 to $80,000 a year by taking care of my consumer. as opposed to her being in a skilled nursing facility. They don't know jack. And I have received nothing in support from IHSS and
John?
public authority this year.
John, how about letting her answer? Somebody else has theirs. Somebody else is not muted. TJ Dama. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Wait, was there a question there? I heard him.
Yeah, the question
Sorry?
is,
If I
will
can
What's the
you
summarize.
question,
consider
John?
going to statewide bargaining
Oh, okay.
to alleviate these inequalities in our system and in the service supplied to the disabled and seniors of our state?
So
We
that's an
need
interesting-
statewide bargaining.
So it's an interesting question. I mean, but a lot of our human services are provided through the counties, which is probably why it was set up this way. But I don't know enough about it to really say, whether there are what the pros and cons are to switching it to statewide versus keeping it at the county level. But I would happy to talk to you about that more. But I am glad with your start. I agree. I'm so glad that we saved the cuts to HSS because you're right. It saves us money. It's a smart spending to have you taking care of people in their homes. It's also safer for people right now with the pandemic. And it's what people want. They want to stay in their homes and be taken care of by people they love. So it's a really critical thing that our community provides. And to your point, we need to do it in a way that makes sense. But I'm sorry, I don't know enough about going to statewide to answer that. But I'm happy to follow up.
My dear Madam Assembly Member, I'll be happy to discuss this with you anytime that's convenient for you.
Perfect. Are you in
And-
van matching? You guys are wearing very
Thank
similar
you.
shirts, I'm noticing.
Hey, Van Rainey had a question, and I'm having a lot of technical difficulty getting the question up there. It was about several assembly bills that were environmental bills. Van, are you still with us?
Oh, yes. And you sent those to me beforehand. So I did see this. And they were all utilities bills, or most of them. And so guess what? He didn't hear those bills either. He didn't hear any bills in the utilities committee.
Will they come to you?
They won't. They were not heard in their first committee, so we will not hear them, which is.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. Yeah, so you mentioned SB 1215 Stern, 1847 Levine, and a Comlogger bill, and two Stern bills, a Levine bill and a Comlogger bill, all of which were not heard in utilities, which is where they were supposed to be heard. So they will not see the light of day. I know, but I'm telling you, we're going to push harder next year because utilities should be doing so much right now. Trust me, I've had many calls. I mean, another one of, I don't believe, so Senator Glazer and I co-authored a really important bill on making sure that people had backup power during PSPS, right? Just requiring it. Like, you can't let people go without life-saving devices. And that bill wasn't heard either. I mean, it's just crazy.
You'll reintroduce that though, will you? Won't you?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. The one question I had that it doesn't involve legislation was whether you'd be interested in sponsoring the Climate Safe California Rapid Decarbonization proposition. It's not really like a initiative proposition. It's more like a Green New Deal, if that's something that your office would consider endorsing.
So is this the bond?
No, it's not a bond.
Oh,
It's
not the
just
bond.
it's basically like the Green New Deal for California, and it's about accelerating decarbonization within the state.
Oh, yeah. So one of the fascinating things about, I get asked a lot, do you support the Green New Deal? Would you support the Green New Deal in California? I'm like, the Green New Deal is based on a lot of what California's done. Let's be clear, we've led the nation and they are ready to follow us. So that's the one problem with that question usually. But I think it's and I don't know enough about the act that you referenced, but decarbonization is obviously really important. And I have to give a shout out to one of your neighbors, the Lawrence Livermore Lab put out, I don't know how many of you have read their incredible report they put out on this issue, and sort of looking at the cost benefit of each measure we can take. And, this one might not have a lot of benefit. It's also low cost, so we should do it. And I think it was an incredible, brilliant, some of our best minds putting their thoughts behind what we should be doing. And we hosted them for a presentation in the Capitol, really trying to push those solutions forward to you know, how do we do all of these things? Because we need to accelerate our fight against climate change. And I have to say that one of the upsides to what has happened now is planes aren't going, people aren't driving, and we actually have seen a huge drop in greenhouse gas emissions. But we don't believe these patterns of behavior are permanent. And so how do we also dial back the clock on the many, many years of devastation that we've caused? So yeah, I'm always in.
So one of the things we're hoping for is a more statewide implementation of things like REACH codes. And, you know, there's Title 29 legislation requires solar on residential buildings these days. But a lot more can be done with regard to new construction requiring things like heat pumps, electrification of cooking systems, things along those lines. And right now we're having to go to city after city after city. I think the city of Dublin's considering REACH codes. The city of Pleasanton is. Livermore is not far enough along on their climate action plan to really have that stipulated yet. But instead of going through, you know, city by city by city, it'd be nice to know if that kind of legislation could be supported at the state level.
Yeah, no, and I think that there was a couple things that were moving on that. I believe the electrification piece was being considered at the state level, and then with COVID, we did try to pare back sort of the new requirements in a lot of spaces just because we felt like it was too challenging right now. I mean, our city staffs who deal with all this new legislation have had to lay off most of their staff, right? So one of the things we were really conscious of is too many changes on the city level where they just don't have the staff to manage and understand it right now. So we're trying to be conscious of where our cities are right now, but those are all things that are on the table, and we're looking at how we can do better. And I think, you know, also what is the state impact? So we just moved a bill. There was going to be an impact of, they done quite a few years ago that if you put solar on your house, it's not considered a remodel, if you will, so you don't get reassessed, right? So we wanted to make sure people didn't say, oh, I shouldn't get solar because then my house is going to get reassessed, right? And so, because that's a benefit to the state if people are using clean energy. So we just moved an expansion of that. So we are making sure we're covering our bases where we need to on the issues you talk about, but we'll also continue to look at how we can do more. Because you're right, Berkeley banned natural gas, what was it, a couple of years ago now. And so cities are ahead of us. Oh, was it last year? This whole pandemic has really messed with my sense of time.
Well, let me ask you, are they considering delaying the due dates for legislation in the next session due to the COVID crisis? Will they delay, you know, past the January and February deadlines for submitting legislation?
That's an interesting question. So we have to submit them by usually February, but then you can amend them. So we just put spot bills in so we can add things. So I doubt we'll extend the deadline, but we have time. There are ways to work the system.
I'm going to try again for getting the screen up, and if I can only read these.
Go ahead and share again. It's the green one in the middle.
Okay, well.
I feel like they're quite.
No.
Okay.
It didn't come up.
We're seeing your email now.
Joy Montgomery, she's not here, and I could pass it on, but apparently she didn't get a response from your website. And I believe her email address was in the one that I sent you. Mary Perner put up a question in the chat box. Can we get to that one?
I was trying to look at the questions in the chat box.
I can just read it. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I can't see you. I don't have a screen anymore. Yeah, I just see my little face. Rebecca, this is from Marla Heng from Livermore Indivisible. And, my name is Mary Perner. I'm also with Indivisible, and I got a couple questions from.
I know. Hi, Mary. It's good to see you.
Hi, from a couple people on the steering committee, and I just lost it. Okay, found it again. So Marla, who is an attorney, and she sounds like one. Yes. Let's see. Do you support or oppose Prop 20? Did you talk about that a minute ago? And the Tougher on Crime bill that was addressed at our meeting the other night. Passing Prop 20 would involve changes to Prop 47 passed by voters in 2014, and Prop 57 passed in 2016, and aspects of Assembly Bill 109 passed in 2011. 57 involves changes to the state constitution not specifically addressed in Prop 20. Also 20 would add certain crimes to the, oh, this is about crimes, to the violent category, and change certain misdemeanor crimes to wobblers, changeable as either misdemeanor or felony. What's your take on it?
So I have not studied Prop 20. It wasn't one we voted on. So the ones that we put on the ballot, I know better than the ones that it must have been a signature gathering effort. So I don't know enough about it to answer right now. I know that I'm going to be totally frank with you guys. I'm not a huge fan of propositions. Sometimes we have to use them to amend the Constitution, but I think that it's not the greatest way to legislate. We have a representative democracy for a reason. We spend a lot of time on the nuance of every sentence that we deal with. And yes, I brought bills this year that would have increased crimes from misdemeanors to wobblers. I did one in partnership with Planned Parenthood. If you harm a Planned Parenthood worker right now, that is just a misdemeanor. And there are actually similar statutes where you harm other people that are wobblers. And we didn't think that was right. So we were increasing the penalties on that. It didn't get a hearing, but that was never what we were trying to do. We also, there's this perverse law around domestic terrorism where that's just a misdemeanor. And we had someone who was committed serious threats and had built an arsenal to carry out those threats, and the only charge he could have was a misdemeanor. I thought that should be a wobbler. So there's places where I think it's appropriate to really look at the sentences and are they appropriate to meet the crime. But there's also places where we are obviously incarcerating, let's be honest, Black and brown people in huge numbers because of the circumstances that they were born into. And we need to really look hard at our system and how we change that dynamic and why the sentences on those get to be so long, and make smart decisions so that we can improve outcomes and get to a better place where our system is not so unjust. So I don't know enough about that to speak directly because it's sort of a nuanced question, but I think it's really important that we don't make poor decisions about our criminal justice system because it is really complex and different crimes deserve different considerations. And I think that's really critical. And so
Thank you. And I want to
do it by proposition.
correct myself. That was not Marla's question. That was Christine Kansas' question. And so if you will allow me, this is Marla's question. Could you talk about your support for Prop 25 and SB 10, which is bail reform?
Okay.
You respond to the ACLU's and other advocates' concerns that it is too heavily weighted toward detention, gives too much discretion to judges, and does not have sufficient safeguards to ensure racial justice in this new pretrial assessment system, particularly in the use of assessment tools. Are you familiar with this measure?
Yeah. Well, so I don't know so I have not studied the measure that's coming up on bail reform, but I can speak to the bail reform the legislature imposed last year before I got to the legislature. And it was complicated, right? So we did bail reform, which was critical to, and I know a little bit about the propositions, I can speak to it a little bit, but bail right now, you get a money bail set, and if you're wealthy, you can pay your bail and you can get out. And if you're poor, you can't get out. And that does not translate into whether you are a risk to the community or not. That translates into how much money you have in your bank account. And when we ask the question of who should be held on bail, I think we probably all agree that the people who should be held on bail are the people who are a risk to our community. Right? I mean, I think that seems obvious, right? And so that is the assessment we should be doing. Now, the legislature wanted to do more, and the ACLU was actually supporting the bill and then pulled their support from the bill because they believed that it didn't get the balance right. And I do support it because I do think that we took a step in the right direction. Do I think we got all the way there? Absolutely not. There's a lot more that needs to happen to get to justice when it comes to bail. But we started to ask the question about who is a risk and who is not a risk instead of who can pay. And I think that was the change that needed to happen. And I think that's right. And so do we have more work to go? Yes. So the bail bondsmen are the ones who put the ballot measure on the ballot because they're not going to make as much money, given the fact that we no longer are just demanding payment. We actually are looking at risk assessments. And I think that it's problematic for them to overturn what the legislature did, which was take a step in the right direction. Again, not all the way there.
Thank you.
Valerie just withdrew her question. She found out it was amended. So Mark Kamenzind.
Wait, but Valerie just took her mic off. Did you have a question, Valerie?
No, I don't know if you had any opinion on it. I just found out, I think it was amended. I still don't know what the bill states right now, but it's SB 902. It's the one that would, by a majority vote of a city council, could overturn any initiative regarding the protection of open space. So I don't know I think it might have been amended to not allow the overturning, but I don't know what the bill stands as with that amendment. So if you have any comment on that, I'd be interested to hear.
I don't. I haven't looked at it, but now I'm going to take a look at it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And in case you didn't know it, Valerie is a candidate for
I know.
Pleasanton City Council.
I know. Thanks for running, Valerie.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
I think Mark Kamenzind, did I say that right?
Perfect.
Are you on there, Mark?
Yeah.
You want to unmute yourself? Oh, okay. You're unmuted. Go for it.
Yeah. So we just had a 2-hour conference call with CDC and NIH today with like 200 people online for 2 hours and talking about post-COVID syndromes that are being triggered and leading to long-term chronic illness. So COVID may only be the tip of the iceberg, and it often triggers longer-term chronic illness, poor recoveries, long haulers. And it may be very similar to ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis, CFS, that already affects 1 to 2 million in the United States. Mostly are women and a lot more minorities. So it's a social justice thing too. And so we need to be educating the schools and the doctors about this illness and tracking it. And so I think we need to have a statewide, we've actually my wife met with UCLA, and she's been trying to work with the California Medical Association and others to raise awareness. And I think at the state level, we're going to need legislation to be tracking this disease. It looks like California is a little bit working with Kaiser, they said today, in Northern California, and 2 other people, I didn't quite get all, something called the EIP program. 10 states are tracking this disease and looking for post-COVID follow-ons that may affect schools, jobs, and the total cost to government. So you should be aware of that.
Yeah, thank you. And I know, just so you know, and I know we've spoken before about your son, and I know, I hope he's doing okay right now. But it's tragic. And to your point, yes, we're seeing, right, that it's not just the virus when you have the virus, but people are obviously struggling for a lot longer. And I know UCSF is doing a study as well on it. So that's, I talked to them about it, and I actually have not talked to Kaiser about it, but I will, because as I mentioned earlier, they're really good at collecting data through their system. And so it's helpful, but UCSF is also trying to enroll folks who are suffering from these long haul symptoms so we can continue to learn more about it, which is really critical. So thanks for bringing it up.
Moni had asked about AB 392. Did you have a follow-up question on that, Moni, or any specific?
No, it's been answered. Thank you, Sean. Thank you.
Okay. And then
I love talking about it, so we can talk about it, but.
No, that'd be awesome. Please.
there was another question earlier from Mary Perner about the model that is being used.
She's
oh,
saying
no.
no.
Wave off. Okay.
Like this.
Sorry. Never mind. Sorry, Mary.
John, I had a question. You spoke about the unemployment insurance, and as most of us know, Donald Trump signed some kind of executive order, which just can turn out to be nothing. But he's offered $300 from the federal government, but the state would have to provide the additional 100. And I think the 300 is contingent on the state putting up the 100. And I'm wondering what your position might be, because it seems like Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic Party are not going to challenge the 300 in court. They're saying, well, it's a Band-Aid, and it's not going to cure the cancer. We wanted a whole lot more, but I'm not going to give back the Band-Aid. because it'd make us look bad giving back the Band-Aid. What's your position on that? What do you think does the legislature even have the ability to fork over the extra $100?
So the governor yesterday announced that we don't, right? I mean, it was COVID relief money that we've allocated to COVID relief. We were not told that was what it was for when it was sent. And now to say that money we gave you that you used for what it was supposed to be used for needs to be sent after the fact. I mean, it's just, he's not, the federal government needs to do what the Congressional Democratic Caucus has put forward, which is to continue to support our unemployed to get them through this, right? And the federal government has the resources to do this. And often I have to have calls with people where I say, we don't print the money at the state level, and we are constitutionally obligated to pass a balanced budget, and we do that. And so we can't just make up money where we don't have it. And we just did $54 billion in cuts. And by the way, if we don't get the HEROES Act passed, there will be more cuts coming down the line. So the federal government needs to step up and support Americans, including Californians, that are suffering right now. And we will do everything we can. And I was just on a call today where we were talking about how do we do this and how do we support Californians when they're not going to be supported by the federal government, because we're trying our hardest to figure it out. And there were some really amazing creative solutions coming out of our caucus to try to figure it out. But it's much more complicated for us than it is for the federal government. And so they need to step up and do their job. And his half measure from this weekend is not them doing their job. And so hopefully we can get to a congressional and Senate solution that will support Americans.
Are there any other questions? Is there anything in the chat that I missed? I just scrolled through the chat and I didn't see.
Sean has been watching and I see him shaking his head no, so.
I don't see anything either.
You know, we're going to put this up on our the Tri-Valley Democratic Club YouTube channel. I think as of last night, we had 8 subscribers. So
I'll be your 9th.
on this call, please check it out and become a subscriber. And our plan is to have this video, and if Rebecca has any videos on her website, we might grab those. Just in general, it's our job to support our candidates. It's very hard during the pandemic, and the YouTube channel is yet another billboard for our candidates. So with that, thank you, Rebecca. We love
Thanks for having me, guys. Good to see you all.
And we're approaching the 7 o'clock hour, and I assumed that you had about an hour allocated to this, and
Yeah.
now we can go eat dinner.
I'm gonna go read stories. It's story time in our house.
There you go.
Good to see you all, guys.
Okay. Tell Bob to stay on.
I'm basking in the Kamala Harris news.
Okay.
And anybody else got anything to say to Rebecca or anybody else here?
Tell Bob to stay on.
Yeah, Sharon wants you to stay on, Bob, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
I will.
I think Rebecca had to hop off, so she's gone.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks so
I'm
much.
hopping off.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
Have a
And
good day.
thank you for participating, everybody.
We should tell Rebecca if she has any bills or anything that she wants, to know us.
She's already said that. She's
Okay.
told us.